Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for joining today. I'm Janet O. I'm the Director of Innovation at Encore.org. And as people are hopping on, if you could just chat in, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know where you're calling from. And if you're affiliated with an organization, that'd be great. And I'm guessing that everyone's familiar with how to do that. But if not, just go to the bottom of your screen and you can see the chat icon and you could chat it in there. We will get started in just a moment as people hop on. Okay, great. I see people from all over, from Maine, from North Carolina, from Los Angeles. So we'll go ahead and get started, and I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Duncan to do a little housekeeping.
Thanks so much, Janet. Hi, everyone. As Janet said, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited to answer your questions and let everyone know a little bit more about the Gen2Gen Innovation Fellowship. I'm behind the scenes here. My name is Duncan Magidson. I'm on the communications team here at Encore.org. I got involved in intergenerational work after my experience on the Hillary Clinton campaign. I was a field organizer and I worked with a lot of older and retired volunteers, and my experiences there really demonstrated to me, one, the value that we're missing when we cast older adults aside, and two, the value in mentorship and intergenerational relationships. So I'm so excited to be here. As you probably noticed, you're all on mute by default. This is on purpose. If you do have questions, instead of shouting them out, you can use the chat feature that's going to be in your navigation bar, either at the bottom or the top of your screen. If you don't see it, check the More area. It's a little ... on the far right. Yeah, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll send it out to you later. Just be aware of that. And if you have any desperate technical issues, you can send me a direct message in the chat and I'll be attentive to that. But I'll send it over to Eunice.
And I'm actually going to go over the agenda, and then I'll hand it off to Eunice in a second.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries, no worries. So this is what we're going to be talking about in our time together. And I'm guessing that we will have, well, we will definitely have a lot of time at the end for questions. So please chat those in. And then at the end, we'll also just hang out for a little bit if you have any specific questions around your project that you'd like to chat about. So first we'll start and we'll give you a little intro to Encore.org and tell you more about why we're doing this work and our goals around it. And then we're going to dive into the details of the fellowship. So we'll give you an overview of the fellowship and talk through the application and next steps. And then at the end, we'll have lots of time for questions. Okay, and with that, I'm going to pass it off to Eunice.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here with you to tell you more about Encore as well as the Innovation Fellowship. But first, a little bit about me. I'm the daughter of Chinese immigrants from Taiwan, so I grew up culturally with a pretty expansive view of what it means for something to feel like home. I always had lots of aunties, uncles, grandmas, and grandpas in my life. Some were related to me, but most weren't. But they all felt equally like extended family. So when I struck out on my own as a young adult, I ended up actually surrounded by other young people in my work and personal life until my story intersected with Encore in my early 20s when I got a job in San Francisco running Experience Corps, which is an intergenerational program created by Encore to bring teams of older adults into public schools to help kids read by 3rd grade. Janet also was a colleague of mine back at that time. So I found myself surrounded by hundreds of adults showing up every day to create stronger communities and better futures for kids in their neighborhoods. And it really felt like I had actually come home in my work life. That crew of older volunteers taught me and my young staff how to hold and express collective grief when 9/11 happened. They were the ones who threw me my first baby shower when I was 7 months pregnant, passing their wisdom across generational and cultural lines. So nearly 20 years later, Encore is as committed as ever to bridging divides, connecting across generations, and creating a better future for young and old alike. We have two programmatic areas of focus. One is narrative change. We elevate new ideas and diverse voices to shift the dominant public narrative from one of generational war and division to conversations that explore the power and potential of generational connection and collaboration. We have a Encore Public Voices Fellowship that we've launched at the same time that is really trying to move that initiative forward. The second area of focus we have is on innovation. We accelerate innovation by offering a variety of fellowships like the Gen2Gen Innovation Fellowship to support people who are bringing generations together to solve society's greatest problems on all kinds of topics. And our goal is to really increase the innovators' capacity in the social sector and to create new models for a multi-generational workforce. In a nutshell, we leverage leaders, organizations, and networks to build a movement making intergenerational connection and collaboration the norm. Last thing I want to say is kind of why launch this fellowship now? Well, today the coronavirus pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on the health and well-being of older generations and people of color. It's exacerbated loneliness and social isolation for both older and younger generations alike. That combined with the profound and deeply embedded impact of racism in every facet of American life has really put our country's inequities in full view. So we've launched the Gen2Gen Innovation Fellowship to call on the creativity of bold thinkers and bridge builders to invest in a better multi-generational and multicultural future. We're looking for leaders who are working at the intersection of aging, longevity, intergenerational connection, and social justice to join us and walk where we can actually walk alongside you for a year to advance this work together. So with that, I'm going to hand things back to Janet, and she's going to go through the details of the fellowship, and you'll have a chance to ask questions along the way. Just a reminder, please use the chat box. I'll be monitoring that and make sure that I can toss those questions over to Janet at the right moment.
Thanks, Eunice. Okay, so a little bit about who we're looking for. So ideal candidates will have an intergenerational program in place. So that's a requirement that there is at least a pilot in place, or if you've been operating for several years, that you are shifting your program or your product in some significant way. Also, that there is a strong asset frame for how you bring the generations together, recognizing the assets of older people and younger people as well. So just to give an example, I think especially in COVID, we've seen programs emerge that are great. And as an example, it could be like a meal service delivery program to elders who are isolated, or other things like that, where elders are kind of like the service recipient. And so for us, that isn't an asset frame where we're specifically looking for programs that are taking advantage and utilizing the talents and experience of older adults and younger people and bridging those generational divides or gaps. So that's something that's really important. If you have questions about that, please chat that in. And then the last part of this is that we'll be selecting 12 fellows, and we'll be looking to develop a really strong cohort of peers. So that's kind of the last piece, is that ideal candidates really have that interest in connecting with others who are doing this work and supporting one another through this fellowship. And so now I'll move on to the criteria. And so with our criteria, one of the most important pieces of the fellowship is around compelling story, because the fellowship is really about highlighting to the world really the power of intergenerational connections and that opportunity. So the ability to tell your story and tell your story well is something that we'll be spending a good chunk of time in the fellowship doing. And so as you think about your application, I think spending that time to tell your story is really important. And you can do that in two ways. So one way is through some of the written questions that are in the application. And the second part is through the optional video. So I would strongly encourage you to do the video. And it doesn't need to be the production value doesn't matter. It's really an opportunity to share your passion for why you do the work that you do, and perhaps even weave in some stories, whether they're your own personal stories or stories around the people who you work with. The second piece around innovation. So I think what is helpful to think about when you're thinking about innovation is, how is your work either new or different from others who are doing the work? So it could be, I think this question of definition is actually, or innovation is quite hard to define. It's not like a black and white thing. Sometimes it's clear because it's a new thing that you know, we might not have heard about. It's a new approach to something. Sometimes it's just an interesting twist to the way things have been done. So I think as you think about your program, part of the innovation piece is kind of thinking about like how your work stands out from other people who might be doing a similar thing. Maybe no one is doing a similar thing, so it's quite clear. If you're in kind of an area where there are a lot of other players, telling us and explaining how it's different. And it might be very different because it's unique to like your specific community, or it's in the way that you're doing something. Encore fit. So again, this comes back to that asset frame. So we're looking for applicants who engage people 50 plus in a way that sees aging through an asset lens again. So just to give you one brief example of that, in a previous cohort fellowship that we ran that was focused on connecting the generations in the space of early childhood, we had a fellow who was bringing older adults and kids around intergenerational cooking. That's one example. Another example was through a preschool, a Montessori-based approach, where someone was pairing older adults with dementia with really young children. And I think that example is actually a perfect example of how the fellow was looking at that group of elders with dementia and still seeing like the many ways in which they could bring their talents and experience to young children, and kind of vice versa. It was very much like a mutually beneficial relationship there. The next piece around impact, the way that we're specifically thinking about it, we ask, does the model serve communities that stand to gain the most from increased social connection? And is there strong potential or existing evidence that the program works? Is there a way to measure impact in the future? So for some of you, you'll be running pilot programs, and we understand that that evidence won't currently exist, but we would like to know how you're thinking about what your impact is and potential ways of measuring it. Next, the issue of scalability or replicability. So the way we think about that is, does the work have the potential to spread, to serve at some point hundreds, if not thousands, of older adults and younger people? It may not be that you will have a plan for that replication yourself. It could be that you're piloting something to then demonstrate and work with others on that replication. But again, we're looking at it through that lens of, at some point down the road, is this an idea that could serve hundreds, if not thousands? And then the last piece is around leadership. Has the applicant demonstrated leadership in their field or in their community? So a lot of this fellowship is about shining a light on these bright examples, and Encore will be doing a lot of that on behalf of the fellows, but we also are looking for fellows who have some of that platform already and have ways of kind of sharing the work that they're doing, and also leveraging the attention that we can drum up. So I'm going to pause there for a moment, since that was a lot of information, and see if anyone has questions. So again, you can chat those questions into the chat box. And I'll just give people like a minute or so. Okay, I see a question come up, and we will get to that question, but I'm just going to answer it now since it's a good one. Someone asked, do we have to be serving U.S. citizens? I believe that was the question. So you can have an international approach to the work that you're doing, but you must have a U.S. Program in place. So serving U.S. older adults and US-based younger people.
These other two questions are good ones to answer now, Janet. One is what stage of pilot, just a quick refresher for somebody who came late, as well as how formal does that pilot or work need to be?
Okay, so for us, like at Encore, as we've been looking out into the world of programs kind of doing this work, I think we realize that the field of intergenerational programming is, there still is so much to be done, and it is a nascent field in many regards. So the way that we define pilot, our minimum bar is pretty simple. It's you have to have at least one older adult who is a real person with a real name working with a younger person who is has a name as well. And some of that comes to about the storytelling aspect of it, that the fellowship is really based on sharing your work with the world, and that ability to talk about something in real terms about real people is absolutely necessary, as opposed to just an idea. So that is how we're defining it. Was there a second part of that question?
Just how formal it needs to be, and maybe you can, this is a riff on that, which is somebody's asking if the pilot was several years ago and no longer running, but this might be the perfect time to reactivate it because of COVID. Would that qualify? So if the pilot happened a few years ago.
Yeah, I think that gets a little bit tricky. I would say that, if it's something that was running a few years ago and you're looking to start it again, to me, I would be interested in that. But I do think that there needs to be some foundation on the ground that gives us a lot of confidence in the ability of that program to start up again. So if it would be even better if you had a few examples of that work happening already, so that you could tell those stories and be able to share that picture of the work that's being done. If you have these like strong relationships with whether it's institutions or other organizations where you're already in conversation and you can get that up and running very quickly, I think that makes it more compelling as well.
Great. There's another question about defining older participants. What if they are younger than 50?
Yeah, I think the primary group we're looking at when we think of older adults is 50 and older. Eunice, I'll let you chime in if you have any different opinion on that.
No, I think I agree with that. We don't want to put a stake in the ground on the number because so much depends on the focus of your program and the overall tenor. I can imagine a really strong application where you have many volunteers that are that are volunteers of all ages, for example, including folks in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And you would definitely need to have folks in the 50 plus category too, and be able to talk about the reasons for why that cohort, the generations of baby boomers and older are, and actually now increasingly Gen Xers, kind of what they're bringing specifically because of the life stage that they're in. So you can be working with people of all ages, but you will want to spend a bit of the application talking about your view on what it is the older generations in particular bring to the table. I wanted to also clarify one other thing. Some of the examples that Janet gave were of older generations with young kids. We're equally interested in innovations of older people working with young adults. In particular, in this moment around social justice, we know there are a lot of young people who are stepping out and really caring about the environment, gun violence, racial equality. We often hear a narrative of a huge divide between what young people are interested in and how they're securing a good future for themselves and the world versus older people. Any project projects that are trying to bridge that divide and bring older activists together with younger ones, we're very interested in seeing as well. So it does not need to be children. Okay, Jay asked a question, do you need to be part of an organization to apply, or can you be an individual?
You can be an individual to apply, so absolutely. I would say that when we think about scalability and replicability, my assumption, and there could be examples that fall outside of this, but my assumption is that would happen with the backing at some point of a more formal organization or entity. So, you know, if you have plans or you have a vision for how that kind of scalability or replicability will develop, you should definitely include that in your application. And I saw that someone had a question about scale. Again, it's like the ideas that we're looking for are about serving large groups of people. So if you have an idea that is in a pilot that is around like a very specific or small community, the lens in which we're asking you to think about it and tell us about your work is how would you get that small pilot to then expand and serve a much larger group of people. And that doesn't have to be like after a year. It doesn't even have to be after 2 years, but that there is a vision and thus a path to getting there.
Great. Janet, do you want to address, there are a couple questions on how formal your leadership needs to be in order to qualify, and another one which is around if you have many co-leaders on your team, how do you figure out who should apply?
Yeah. The co-leader question has come up, and it's an interesting question. So the fellowship, what we're asking in terms of how people are thinking about the amount of time that will be required is roughly a half a day each month. We'd have a fellowship cohort gathering. It will be virtual, but that is kind of an estimate of the time that is needed. So absolutely a person who has that time to give. There will be, part of the fellowship will be, you know, you'll have the opportunity to invite other colleagues or volunteers or co-founders into some of the fellowship meetings. Some of it will be just for the one fellow. So, and we're going to get to this. So perhaps after this question, we'll keep going with our presentation. But there will be a time when the fellows will each give a 3-minute pitch about the work that they're doing. And that will be one fellow. The selected fellow will do that. So it is very important to just choose one. We will pick 12 fellows. So from your team and organization, you need to pick one to be kind of the official fellow, but know that during the 9-month fellowship period, there will be many opportunities for other team members to join into the conversation.
Great. I'm going to answer one more set of questions, and then and then Janet, you can move on with the presentation. So just another thing on leadership, we are specifically looking to source a multi-generational cohort of fellows. So we're not just looking for people at a very mature or advanced stage of their career. We're as interested in somebody in their 20s who has just launched a startup or is starting to really exercise their activism in the community. We think part of the power of the cohort will be for the cohort itself to be multi-generational, and that there are different things that young people bring to the table than those who have been at their work for many years. And we think that you'll find that very enriching yourself. So when it comes to leadership, it's less about the specific place that you've kind of achieved in your career. And I'd say more, Janet and I talk a lot about kind of go-getter spirit, the ability to innovate and think beyond the standard ways of doing things, that you've shown initiative. And within that, we do hope and plan for a number of the fellows to be at a more advanced part in their career, because that will be part of the co-mentorship that happens in the fellowship. So we're really looking for a big range. Okay, let's go on with the presentation. And if you have some questions here, we'll circle back to them.
Okay, so what will fellows receive? So each of the 12 fellows will receive $10,000. And then there will also be a chance at an additional $5,000. We have a panel of judges who will listen to those 3-minute pitches that I talked about. So one of the 12 fellows will also receive an additional $5,000 Judges Award. The fellows will receive expert coaching in program design and then how to give that pitch, and then telling your story to the world. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. There is the cohort experience, and again, most of that will be virtual. We're hoping for one in-person event in June of 2021, if safety allows. And then exposure to important networks. So I think that's a strength of Encore.org, is kind of telling your story and getting that out into the world. So that will be another benefit of the fellowship. We're also, and we've done this for past fellowships that we've run, is providing a professional photographer to come out and take photos of your work in action. So again, that's kind of safety allowing, but that's something that I think has been a really important resource for our fellows. And then the opportunity to be showcased at Gen2Gen Live, which is a new event that we'll be launching June of 2021 to showcase kind of the brightest thinkers in intergenerational, in the intergenerational field. So if we could go to the next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the curriculum. So the 9-month fellowship is kind of broken out into 3 modules. So the first 3 months, and this is sort of like roughly, the first 3 months will be based on honing your model. So we'll be looking at program design. We'll be looking at sort of best practices in intergenerational work. You'll hear from previous fellows who have participated with us, and really be looking at how to hone your model, thinking about impact and how you measure that, those types of things. The next 3 months will be really focused on crafting that compelling pitch and your storytelling abilities. And so for that work, we're working with Andy Goodman, who we've worked with for many, many years. He's a master and an expert at not only storytelling, but coaching people in how to tell 3-minute stories. So that will be one-on-one work, kind of crafting a pitch, and then practicing that with Andy, getting his feedback, and then it will culminate in an online virtual innovation showcase where you present your pitch to our network. And then the last 3 months, will be focused on spreading your ideas to broader audiences. And specifically, that's working with our partner, the Op-Ed Project, in thinking about how you tell your story and how you share your work out into the world, whether that's through op-eds or other public venues for sharing your ideas. So this is one of our past fellows that I mentioned. Her name is Jennifer Thompson, and she was one of our early childhood innovation fellows. And I just wanted to share this story because it's so great, but her program was based on intergenerational cooking. In that fellowship that was focused on early childhood, we really just tested this idea of like the online storytelling pitch and really helping our fellows work on that piece of it. And one of the great things that came out of it was right after she did her pitch practice and she had crafted her pitch, she had an opportunity to present to one of their funders, which is Giant Foods. And she told us that because of all that work she did, she felt really confident in her ability to give that pitch online. She had 30 seconds to do it. She did it, and she secured $150,000 for her program in 2 years. So we're by no means promising that this will be the outcome for each of our 12 fellows, but I will say that in each group of fellows that we've had in the past, there has been some version of this. So just to kind of highlight the importance and the different ways in which the pitch will be useful beyond just this fellowship. And then I'm gonna just run through this timeline and next steps, and then we'll have the rest of the time for questions. So the timeline, July 15th is when applications are due. All of them must be submitted online. And if you go to our website, you'll see the link there. They are due by 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Eastern. And then the Encore team will spend approximately the next month reading through everyone's application and learning about the work that you're doing. We'll then select a group of about 24 to be interviewed. We'll do those interviews the last week of August, and then by September 15th, we will announce our 12 fellows. Then in October, the fellowship will begin. Again, it will be virtual. And then spring of 2021 is when fellows will be doing that online innovation showcase. And then June 2021 is when we will have a graduation for our fellows, and that will also be aligned with our Gen2Gen live event, which I mentioned. So next steps. The next step is to make sure you submit your application by July 15th. We do have office hours, and I looked this morning and they were all full. So we've added an additional date for office hours. These are 15-minute slots where if you have questions about your application, if you want to ask about like how to, if you're thinking about like different ways of approaching your application or have questions about how to make it the most compelling, this is a good time to just sign up for office hours and then have a 15-minute chat with Eunice or myself about your questions. And then lastly, on our website, there is a super extensive FAQ. So I recommend that you look through those. You can just skim them really quickly, but we spend a lot of time kind of thinking about questions that have come up in the past and also questions that keep coming up. So for sure, go there first to see if there are answers to any questions that you might have. So, and I see that someone asked for the link to office hours. We'll get those into the chat. You can also find them by going to our website and you'll see the office hours link there as well.
Yeah, I just put them there, but also would say, please use this time. You have both myself, Janet, and Duncan. And as we finish the formal part of this presentation, we're happy to stay online and answer your specific questions as well. And we definitely do ask before you sign up for that, that you take a good look at that FAQ. We have really done a lot of work to answer as many questions as we can there. I wanted to address a couple other things that I saw pop up here. One person asked if the $10,000 for the fellowship can support the salary of the awardee. There really are no strings attached on how that $10,000 can be used other than our desire to make sure that it supports the advancement of your work. So it absolutely can support the salary of the awardee. In case it is important to you, the way we will award that, after you've been selected as a fellow, when the fellowship starts in October, you'll receive the first half, $5,000, and then in the spring, right after you've delivered your Gen2Gen pitch, you'll receive the second half of that. That will also be when the additional possible $5,000 will be awarded for the judges award at that pitch event, which is virtual. So. I think there was one other question, which I think we touched upon, but it might be worth saying again. Somebody said, if my work is for people between like the ages of 1 and 99, and I work with all ages, is that enough of an intergenerational frame? I would just say again there, we love that you're working with all ages in your application. It will be much stronger if you make sure that you articulate the specific rationale for why you think it makes a difference to have that diversity of ages, and how in particular older and younger, when brought together, have that mutual benefit. Remembering what I said earlier when I told you about Encore's mission, one of the things we're really interested in is countering a public narrative of generational war. There isn't really a public narrative about 30-year-olds fighting with 40-year-olds. It really is about older generations, 50 plus, battling resources with people who are in their 20s or in their teens, or with young people, and have we safeguarded their future? So once again, we don't want to put strong parameters on that, but knowing that that is the main impetus for the kind of content we are interested in putting out, talking about, writing about, spreading, the more that you can talk about the intentionality in your design with that, the stronger your application will be from our perspective.
I saw that someone asked a question about how do you recommend we account for COVID-related program design changes in the application? So we are absolutely interested in how people are adjusting and taking into account COVID related opportunities or limitations. So I would say like your application really has to address that. And I think that's an opportunity where you can show how your program is innovative in terms of how are you adapting. I've heard of examples of programs that were taking place in person, and during these months of sheltering in place, everything has moved online and it's actually like working beautifully. So I think in that example, it's a great opportunity to showcase like why that connection is so important, the fact that it can be transferred to a virtual format. And then if that is true, then in terms of scalability and replicability, that actually opens the door. If you know that virtual works, that you can serve many other communities. I would say again, like we absolutely want to know how you are adapting under COVID conditions.
There's also a great comment and question from Kathy, who says she appreciated the example of elders teaching younger generations. What are your thoughts on intergenerational learning communities, co-learning in a train-the-trainer model, so elders and youngers then go on to teach what they learn? Do you want to take that one, Janet?
Yeah. We absolutely, I think that those examples of like older teaching younger, that is the tradition, the traditional model of things that we have seen in the past, and things that are, I think, easily come to mind because they have been done. And we absolutely love this idea of intergenerational learning communities of people working together. So another example that I've heard recently is in the nonprofit community, ideas of pairing more experienced leaders with people who are kind of earlier in their careers to think about nonprofit leadership transition, and also the benefit leaders get from one another, experience kind of matched with like a fresh set of eyes to the field. Absolutely, co-learning is awesome. We definitely want to see more of that.
Yeah. We're actually at Encore working on a new, very nascent initiative around intergenerational national service. And so for those of you who are connected to that world, you may know that there's a branch of national service called Senior Corps with foster grandparent program and Senior Corps. And then there are younger service members that are normally AmeriCorps members, AmeriCorps Vistas. And we're working on an idea of what would it look like to actually have older and younger service members serving together alongside one another, intentionally placed intergenerationally in nonprofits and within communities. So once again, we have a very natural interest in what it looks like to have older folks and young adults working alongside each other, mutually teaching one another while serving. Let's see, another question by Ryan says, are people who are situated within larger organizations like universities a good fit for this fellowship?
Yeah, and I would say absolutely. I think we're open to like the spectrum. If you're an individual with an idea and a pilot, and you can see a path to kind of a more sort of formal organization, we're absolutely interested in that. If you're a person within a larger setting, and we've had those types of fellows in the past too, like in a city government or in a university, we understand that the context is different and some of the challenges and the benefits are different. But I think if you're someone in a larger organization, there is an opportunity that's kind of built in for scale, assuming that you can get that entity to support the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and I can give you two concrete examples of folks who've participated in kind of learning cohorts in the past that represent cities or universities. We've worked closely with the city of San Jose because one of the mayor is kind of head of innovation, joined a learning cohort of ours because the mayor intentionally wanted to harness the experience of older adults in Silicon Valley to work with young people. And he also wanted to embed Encore Fellows, who are sort of people transitioning out of their primary career and wanting to do a transition into the social sector or public sector. And he agreed to place a number of these Encore Fellows in city government to work on these intergenerational initiatives. We worked very closely and walked alongside one of his key staff to ensure that they could have not just our expertise, but a community of other peers doing that kind of work. So it's a lot more complicated working within a city structure, but that's one of the reasons why it's all the more exciting to be able to have somebody like that in our innovation cohort. On the university side, we've done a lot of work with universities that are creating career pathways for people who are coming out of their primary careers to actually re-career in a way that is honoring of the fact that they actually have a lot of lived experience. One thing that we have been pushing some of those folks to think about is those often become siloed programs for older adults on a university campus. There are younger people right there. What would it look like to build in intentional touch points and mentoring and connection with younger people on campus? So just an example of some things that are happening on the university front that are interesting to us that we hope others are working on as well.
A couple of other questions. One was about where do you illustrate leadership in the application? So absolutely, your bio is a great place for that. There is also a place to put in your LinkedIn profile. So that would be another great place. And I think you can mention it in your video. Don't feel like you need to sell yourself in your video. The video is really about sharing your passion for your idea. But I think that there are a few different places in the application where you can do that. Cheryl asked, I've begun my small pilot in some part within families to be expanded beyond. Is that permissible? Absolutely. So again, I think you want to tell the story of those examples that are happening within families. And then as you talk about your vision, kind of share how this would move beyond the families that you're working with.
Yeah, Janet and I often talk about how this work, intergenerational work, is by definition personal. Duncan's got a story, I have one, Janet has one, everybody on this call has a personal connection, and we think that a lot of the bridging of generational divides will happen within our personal spheres, but we are equally interested in when that happens, then how do we move that beyond family bonds to friends, neighbors, and then people we don't even know. So lean into wherever you are. We're interested in that personal story. And I'll also say, you know, we only have 12 slots for this initial fellowship. We hope that many of you will consider applying. If you don't make the final cut to be part of this cohort, please know that we are still very much interested in you. As I said, in terms of what Encore does, we are trying to create a network and community of leaders and innovators and social activists. Everything that we do in the fellowship, to the extent that we can, we'll try to make sure we reflect those learnings publicly so that you can continue to learn from it. Hopefully that will make you a stronger applicant the next time around. We have webinars and other community conversations that we make available to our larger community of leaders. We've had many people join us in that and contribute greatly and learn from that too. So this is not a one-time shot to be part of the kind of leadership community we're trying to build.
So I think we've gotten to most of the questions. Again, we can stay on longer if people have additional questions. So please continue to type them into the chat. We will be sharing the recording of this session with everyone, as well as, you know, a reminder of the link to the application, a link to the office hours. So you will receive that in the next day or two. And I see that Regina had a question about creative social enterprises. So Regina, I think I might have you just like unmute and tell us a little bit more about that. But I also wanted to just respect everyone's time. So if you need to go, feel free to hop off. We'll send you the recording. If you have additional questions, feel free to stay on, and we can go through them.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Greetings from Culver City. I'm trained as a music therapist, and I'm at a point where I have been raising funds for nonprofits, primarily for homeless youth in Hollywood and Oakland. And there are critical gaps in our systems of care, we know that. So I am now at the point of a convergence of bringing a musical to a nonprofit where the adults, the older folks, connect with the kids. And they are able to sell their product, which are these musical instruments, songs and things. And I'm just curious if that is something that is beyond the scope of what Encore really is set up to do, or if it would be, and I have to say, I have to learn more about I haven't looked at your application, I'm sorry to say. And that I'm sure will tell all, but just in general, have you had creative social enterprises?
Yeah, absolutely. We're absolutely interested in artists and creatives. So that's definitely something that we're interested, a group that we're interested in engaging with. And we have applicants who are kind of doing theater, doing art, bringing the generations together. So just based on your really brief description, I just say that what we're interested in is the model and how you would bring that to various communities. So I say that to mean like we're not interested in like a one-off production or sometimes we're working with filmmakers. We're not interested in like the one script or the one film, but really interested in like this larger approach of how might you do this for communities in many different geographies, or again, like that question of like hundreds, if not thousands of people in some sort of ongoing way.
Right, okay. I mean, the idea was that if there are any products that can sustain the actual program. So there's a nonprofit in Hollywood, for instance, they don't have a budget for this sort of thing, but if they were selling kazoos with the name of this theater piece or that's created, okay. So I'm in the, yeah, sure, thank you. I get it, you really.
Yeah, and that question around like if there are other people with like for-profit ideas, like this is absolutely open to nonprofit and for-profit and government. So we're sort of agnostic about that piece of it. But again, it's really about like what is the impact of that work. So if it is in selling musical instruments, I think our questions would be around like how are older adults and younger generationals benefiting from the product in the many different ways that it's being utilized.
Right. Okay. Yeah. It's this one is the Zoo Rockers. It's engagement, completely engagement, and the universal language of music. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to see, I don't know if Wilma is still with us. She says, can the fellowship grantee be a multi-generational group of people or only an individual within? I'm not sure I fully understand that question. So Wilma, if you're with us, you can articulate more.
Yes, I'm here. I have a group of people that we've been working together at doing intergenerational work. It is called a smart salon. And what we do is bring interdisciplinary different ages into the group and talk about existential thought. And that's the group the basic group we have is what I'm talking about. I am the individual who began it, but I'm 83. I'm not interested in getting a fellowship, but I think it has the validity to be part of this.
Yeah. I'll take a stab at that, and then Janet, feel free to add on to that. So Wilma, I would say if it's kind of like a collective, or where there are, it's sort of created or co-created by many. The fellowship that we're running is for one person, and so any of them could be eligible. If you have a mentee or somebody who's younger that has played a prominent role or could play a prominent role, that might be somebody that you would want to encourage to apply for the fellowship. And there will be certain modules that we offer where the fellow will need to be there, but we will open it up to other members of the group. For example, if we'll do a section on kind of upping your game on social media, we recognize that the fellow, him or herself, might not be the one ultimately doing social media or outreach of that nature, and would invite you to invite other people to the table. So there will be some opportunities for others to participate or learn from some of the things that we're doing, even if the bulk of the cohorting and peer learning will happen just amongst the fellows. So it is fine for you to encourage somebody else in your collaborative group to apply.
Thank you.
I see that Audrey asked a question. Applicant generation only allows a person to select one generation. We will be serving a multi-generation. How do we work with this? So in that question on the application where it asks for applicant generation, that's for the applicant, the fellow who is applying. We would like to know your generation. So not the people that you are serving.
And that's once again because we really would love for the cohort of 12 that we have to itself be multi-generational. And so we're interested in the generation you associate with and how that might form and shape your contributions to the group. Any other questions? I think we've answered most of them. I'm going to put a link here we are running another fellowship right now that many of you may have heard of. It's the Encore Public Voices Fellowship. I'm going to put a link here if you're interested in learning more. It is also a one-year fellowship on the same timeline as ours. It really is, the main focus there is if you're at a point in your career or in your innovation work where the most strategic thing you could focus on is developing your public voice, specifically writing things like op-eds to get your ideas out there. We will, as Janet said, have in our third module a lighter touch with the op-ed project, which is our partner in doing that work. But it is a light touch, whereas the Encore Public Voices Fellowship is all about developing your ability to write and get op-eds placed over the course of a year. So if that is of interest, I encourage you to check that out. If what's more useful to you is a deep dive on your intergenerational innovative work and being with a cohort of doers who are trying to make moves on the ground, then we encourage you to be applying for this fellowship.
And I see, so thank you everyone so much for joining. I see that there are a couple more questions that seem pretty specific to the idea that people have. So feel free to stay on and we can stay on for a little bit longer. Otherwise, thanks so much for joining and we look forward to getting your application. So let's see, Audrey, it sounds like you might still have a question that wasn't answered. So if you want to unmute yourself.
Thank you. This is really wonderful. We're very excited. I work with the Senior Alliance of Platte Canyon up in rural Colorado, up in the mountains. And we want, and it's a mover. I mean, the two women that started the organization just a year and a half ago have been incredible. They've got a nonprofit, they've got grants for a nurse lending library for older adults. They have an office, and I was part of that. But then this Gen2Gen came up, and I talked to them about it, and they're really excited. And the problem is the virus. And what we want to do is work with high school students, juniors and seniors that are trying to get community service credit for graduation, and hook them up with isolated older adults in the mountain community that need services, but there's a lot of stopping blocks with the older adults that are isolated. Number one, they probably don't have, a lot of them don't even have a television, so to communicate with them. Now, my idea was with with the group was to get the seniors, the high school students, to number one, market the program, number two, to literally go visit with the older adult and share, find out what their needs are and satisfy those needs. And I did that in Minnesota 20 years ago with a service learning program. Actually, we were the first service learning program in Minnesota in the early 90s. And it worked. We satisfied the community's needs. Now, but with the coronavirus, it's going to be really difficult to face. So I thought initially, so, I mean, how do you deal with something, how would we deal with something like that? And I'm sharing my idea, and you can see we're really excited about it. Maybe I should be videotaping myself as I'm talking about it. But I was thinking they could send letters off initially, handwritten letters to the older adults in the community. And from there, develop a relationship and possibly speak by phone. But what do you think? I mean, how would we deal with that, with the virus?
Yeah, I think, so a couple of things that I'm hearing. So one is, I do think that you have to have like a program model in place that is COVID doable. You know what I mean? So, and because when we're talking about the fellowship, we're kind of, one of the questions is like, at the end of a year, like what do you hope to accomplish? So I think absolutely you need a way of delivering your program now. Secondly, like I just, you know, what comes to mind as I hear about this is I wonder if there is a pilot in place or if perhaps you're still in idea phase in terms of how to develop those relationships and have those relationships form. So I don't know if you see yourself in pilot phase. That's a question.
Well, as far as the organization goes, they're not in a pilot phase anymore. They actually have a literal office, and they've received a little bit of funding for, you know, purchasing assistive technology, and they are marketing. But yes, as far as intergenerational Gen2Gen, this hasn't been done. This hasn't been done by us.
Yeah.
And I don't believe it's probably, I mean, it could be somewhere in the United States, possibly. That I don't know. I also worked for 16 years for the State Department of Colorado with area agencies. I oversaw 16 area agencies on aging, and they provide services. You're familiar with area agencies on aging, correct?
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know that they have those services available to them and that they're free. And so we could then work too with the state and with the area agency on aging that serves that area is not serving that area, even though they're funded for that area.
Yeah.
So see, we would be bringing that together too. I mean, there's so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's worthwhile to think through, and Audrey, you might want to sign up for an office hours to kind of go through some of this.
Your book. That's how I met you
we
now.
just added some this morning. So if you look now.
I just looked.
Oh, they might be booked again. People are fast.
Okay. I would say, like, in terms of your, the point that you bring up, so it sounds like an institution, an organization that is existing. So that's not in pilot, I get that. But I think the intergenerational piece sounds like it's brand new. So in that way, I don't know if it's meeting that minimum standard of like a pilot program in place. And again, kind of going back to that rule of like one older adult with a name working with one younger person with a name.
Well, but you see, I could get that because I also was working in an assisted living, and I worked with one younger person that I hooked them up with an older adult. And that younger person could help us with this grant with me as an older adult, no?
So I would say absolutely. I think that's the minimal rule. And this is one reason we encourage you to apply, but we'll also say the most competitive applications will be able to extrapolate from the one to the rest. So just make sure you focus on that in your application so that it shows the ability to scale with the connections that you have. Yeah. I do want to address, there was a question that came in from Joanne. I think Joanne is still with us, who asks about, she's trying to create a membership platform with webinars and is in need of tech support. Do you have mentors for that? Joanne wanted to address that one. We are not specifically tech experts. We do actually a lot of webinars specifically with Zoom, have done a lot of webinars in particular with intergenerational or multi-generational audiences. Duncan, who's on the call with us, has graciously offered anybody in our community who wants a Zoom tutorial one-on-one with him to do that. I don't know, Duncan, if you want to just say a word about that and how people can find you if they're interested in that.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and put my email in the chat box. I'm happy to do Zoom consultations for anybody who is, leading an organization or looking to transition a program online. I don't do like personal Zoom tutorials for people who are like looking for how to mute and unmute in their family gatherings. I think that's awesome, but I don't have the capacity for that. But yeah, if you're looking to move a program online or start something new, email me at dmagidson@encore.org, which I just put in the chat.
And Duncan has learned a lot trial by fire. He has horror stories. He also has a lot of phenomenal successes. Any call that goes well for us is because of Duncan. So if that would be useful to advancing your work, I encourage you to sign up for one of Duncan's slots and to be very thankful for him that he's willing to do that outside of his current job responsibilities. He's a wonderful tutor / mentor on these things. Okay, how are we doing here? I think we might be honing in on some of our final questions. I'm in Houston, but our project is focusing on some of the poor areas with some of the same types of challenges. Great. We are very interested in folks working in both more challenged urban areas and also really interested in rural areas that do not get as many resources or attention. So I think we're gonna wrap things up, Janet. We've been on, gosh, I guess a full hour and a half. Thank you for such great questions. Janet, any final comments on how people can get more information and be in touch?
Yeah, if you have like a specific question that wasn't addressed here, you can email us. I will put my email here, joh@encore.org. Otherwise, July 15th is the date, is the deadline, and we look forward to reading about your ideas and hearing about your work. So thanks again. We'll be sending the recording in the next couple days. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Great to see your faces and to hear your voices.